After my sister's funeral, I stepped into Emily's bloom. My husband stormed in behind me. He shouted, "Sell this shop now, or I'll take it all, divorce me if you dare." My sister left me a floral business worth $3 million, and I just smiled, because my husband had no idea. I'm Laura Bennett, and at 22, I said I do to Ryan Carter in a wedding that felt more like a business deal than a promise. My parents owned a small chain of bakeries, kneading dough into a modest fortune, while Ryan's dad ran a hardware store teetering on collapse. Our marriage was their handshake, my family's stability propping up his father's dreams. I didn't love Ryan. 6 years older, he had a loud laugh and a temper that flared like a match, but I couldn't say no. My parents' eyes begged me to agree, so I did, burying my own dream of running an art gallery beneath their expectations. I imagined a life sketching in quiet corners, but Ryan called that a waste of time. We tried for kids, hoping it'd stitch us together, but nothing took root. His mother sneered, "A dry well, that's what you are," her words sharp as broken glass. Ryan just sipped his beer, smirking while I scrubbed their floors, my hands raw and my heart hollow. For 18 years, I faded into their shadow, a ghost in my own life. My only light was my sister, Emily, for years older and fierce as a summer storm. She built Emily's Bloom, a floral shop that grew into a $3 million treasure, petal by petal. She'd hug me tight and whisper, "One day, you'll be free, Laura." But at 40, I lost her to a car crash. Her car flipped on a rain-slick road, gone in an instant. At her funeral, I stood by her casket, tears blurring the roses she'd loved, when Ryan leaned close. "So, how much did she leave you?" he muttered, his breath sour with greed. I froze, the air sucked from my lungs. "No, I'm sorry," no hand on my shoulder, just a vulture circling my grief. My stomach churned as I saw it. He didn't care about Emily, or me, only the dollars he thought were coming. I'd spent years swallowing his indifference, but that moment cracked something open. I wasn't just mourning my sister, I was waking up to the cage I'd lived in, and the man who'd locked the door. Emily's death left me reeling, but her shop, Emily's Bloom, became my lifeline. I'd walk through its glass doors, the air thick with the scent of lilies and lavender, and feel her beside me. She'd willed it to me, $3 million in brick, mortar, and memories, and I swore to keep it alive. It was my chance to heal, to tend something beautiful in her name. But Ryan saw it differently. The day after the funeral, he cornered me in our cramped kitchen, his eyes glinting like coins. "We're sitting on millions, Laura. Sell it. Don't be stupid." His voice was hard, stripping my sister's legacy to a paycheck. I clutched the counter, my knuckles white. "It's not about the money," I said, my throat tight. "It's Emily's." He snorted, "You're too sentimental. We could live big, new house, new car." I stared at him, a stranger in my husband's skin, and felt a cold dread settle in my chest. He didn't care about her dream, or mine, just what he could grab. I started spending mornings at the shop, arranging bouquets and greeting customers, their smiles a balm to my grief. For the first time in years, I felt useful, not just a shadow in Ryan's world. But he wouldn't let it go. He'd barge in after work, tracking mud across the polished floors, barking, "When are you listing it?" I'd shake my head, dodging his demands, but he grew bolder. One night, I came home to find papers strewn across the dining table, a sale contract for the shop, my signature scrawled at the bottom in his jagged handwriting. My heart stopped. "What did you do?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You're too emotional to decide. I did us a favor." Rage surged through me, hot and sharp. I grabbed the phone and called the realtor listed, thank God it hadn't gone through yet. I avoided it, my hands trembling as I faxed proof it wasn't my signature. Ryan just shrugged, "You'll thank me when you come to your senses." I wanted to scream, to claw that smug look off his face, but fear held me back. He wasn't just pushy, he was dangerous. My parents saw it too. They were older now, their hands gnarled from years of rolling dough, but their eyes were sharp. Dad pulled me aside during a Sunday visit, his voice low. "Laura, he's no good. Come home. We'll help you start over." Mom nodded, her apron dusted with flour, tears brimming. "You don't have to stay, sweetheart." I hugged them, their warmth a lifeline, but I couldn't leave. The shop was Emily's gift to me, and our house, shabby as it was, held my family's roots. If I walked away, Ryan would sell it all out from under me. I'd lose everything I had left of her, of them. "I'll figure it out," I promised, my voice cracking. They didn't push, but their worry clung to me like damp fog. I drove home, my mind spinning. Could I really escape him? I'd endured 18 years of his control, his rules, his temper, but this felt different. He wasn't just holding me back, he was trying to erase what mattered most. Back at the house, Ryan escalated his campaign. He'd leave real estate listings on my pillow, circled in red ink with notes like $3.2M, think about it. I'd crumple them, my stomach twisting, but he'd just laugh. "You're stubborn, Laura, but you'll cave. You always do." His confidence gnawed at me, planting doubts. Was I foolish to hold on? The shop was thriving, weekly orders poured in, and I'd even started sketching floral designs in a notebook, dreaming of a gallery corner, but Ryan's shadow loomed larger every day. I locked the deed in a safe under the stairs, a cheap metal box from his dad's store, thinking it'd keep him at bay. I was wrong. He'd watch me with those calculating eyes, like a fox sniffing out a henhouse, and I'd lie awake at night, listening to him pace downstairs, plotting. I didn't know how far he'd go, but I felt it coming, a storm I couldn't outrun. One morning, I found a voicemail from a lawyer friend of Emily's. "Laura, the shop's yours, free and clear, but watch out. Ryan's been asking around about loopholes." My pulse raced. He wasn't just nagging, he was scheming. I tightened security at the shop, adding cameras and a new lock, but the weight of his ambition pressed down harder. I'd catch myself staring at customers, their cheerful chatter fading as I wondered, how long could I hold him off? My grief for Emily mingled with a growing anger, at Ryan, at myself for staying so long. I wasn't the timid girl he'd married anymore, but I wasn't free yet either. My parents' offer echoed in my head, tempting me to run, but abandoning the shop felt like abandoning Emily. So I stayed, tending her flowers, my resolve hardening with every petal I placed. Ryan thought he'd win, that I'd buckle like always. He didn't see the fight building in me, quiet but fierce, ready to bloom. I thought locking the deed in the safe would keep Ryan's hands off Emily's bloom, but I underestimated him. One Tuesday, I came home from the shop, arms full of peonies for a late order, and noticed the basement door ajar. My stomach dropped. I set the flowers down and crept downstairs, the air damp and musty. The safe's lock was busted, the door hanging open like a broken jaw. The deed, my proof of ownership, was gone. I sank to the cold floor, my breath shallow. Ryan hadn't been home all day, claiming a work meeting, but this was no coincidence. He'd pried into my sanctuary, stolen my sister's legacy right out from under me. I checked the shop's cameras on my phone, nothing there, just petals and quiet. He'd done it here, in our own house, where I couldn't escape him. Panic clawed at me, but then a slow burn started in my chest. He thought he could take it all, Emily's dream, my fight, and leave me with nothing. I wouldn't let him. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office, hands shaking on the wheel. I filed a theft report and requested a duplicate deed, explaining the break-in. The clerk, a kind woman with gray streaks in her hair, frowned. "You'll need to prove it's yours, hon, got anything else?" I pulled out Emily's will, my name inked clear as day, and she nodded. "This'll do. Takes a week, though." A week, 7 days of Ryan holding my future hostage. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. Back home, I confronted him that night. He lounged on the couch, a beer in hand, eyes flicking to me like I was an annoyance. "Where's the deed, Ryan?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the tremor inside. He smirked, safe sold. Maybe it got lost. His lie was so brazen it stung. You stole it, I said, stepping closer. Give it back, or I'm calling the cops. He laughed, a harsh bark. Go ahead. Prove it. I clenched my fists, fury drowning my fear. He thought he'd won. Then it got worse. By Friday, whispers started creeping through our small town. Mrs. Henley, who bought daisies every week, avoided my eyes at the shop. The mailman, usually chatty, just nodded curtly. I caught the tail end of a conversation at the grocery store. Cheated her sister out of it, that's what he said. My blood ran cold. I cornered my neighbor, Tom, as he mowed his lawn. What's everyone saying about me? He shifted, uneasy. Ryan's been talking, Laura. Says you tricked Emily into giving you the shop, that it should have been split with your folks. I stared, disbelief crashing over me. That's a lie, I choked out. Tom shrugged, folks believe him. He's loud about it. I turned away, my face burning. Ryan hadn't just taken the deed, he'd poisoned my name, turned our community against me. Every sidelong glance felt like a knife, cutting away the trust I'd built. I'd spent weeks pouring my soul into the shop, and he'd smeared it with one vicious rumor. I locked myself in the bathroom that night, staring at my reflection. My eyes were red, my hair a mess, but I saw something new, steel beneath the exhaustion. Ryan wanted me broken, isolated, so I'd sell and he'd cash out. But I'd survived his family's scorn, Emily's loss, I could survive this. I called my parents, their voices crackling through the line. He's lying about me, I said, tears spilling. Mom's sigh was heavy. We know, Laura. He's desperate. Come stay with us. Dad added, we'll fight him together. I wanted to, God, I did, but running felt like surrender. I can't leave the shop, I said. It's all I have left of her. They didn't argue, just promised to help however they could. I hung up, resolve hardening. I'd get the deed back, clear my name. Ryan wouldn't bury me. Saturday morning, I opened the shop, forcing a smile for customers despite the whispers. A regular, Miss Clara, lingered by the roses. I don't believe what they're saying, she said softly. You've got Emily's heart in this place. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the edge. I thanked her, my voice thick, and kept working, arranging, sketching, fighting the urge to hide. Ryan came home late, reeking of whiskey, and didn't mention the deed or the lies. He just grinned, you look tired, babe. Tough week? I glared, saying nothing. He thought he'd worn me down, that I'd cave under the weight of his theft and slander. But he didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the quiet girl he'd married, bending to his will. I was Emily's sister, forged in loss and grit, and I'd outlast him. The duplicate deed was coming, and I'd rebuild what he'd torn apart, one flower, one truth at a time. The duplicate deed arrived on a crisp Monday morning, a thin envelope that felt like armor in my hands. I'd won a small battle, but Ryan's war wasn't over. I kept it hidden, tucked in a lockbox at the shop, and threw myself into work, arranging tulips, sketching gallery plans, hoping to outpace his next move. That hope shattered Wednesday night. I'd stayed late at Emily's Bloom, finishing a wedding order, and drove home under a starless sky. When I returned the next morning, the front door hung crooked, glass glinting on the sidewalk. My heart thudded as I stepped inside. The shop was a wreck, vases smashed, petals strewn like confetti, shelves toppled. A note in Ryan's scrawl sat on the counter, if I can't have it, no one will. I sank to my knees, glass crunching beneath me, and traced a torn lily with trembling fingers. This wasn't just vandalism, it was violence against Emily's memory, against me. Tears burned my eyes, but fury roared louder. He'd crossed a line I didn't know existed, and I hated him for it. I called the police, my voice shaking as I reported the break-in. They came, took photos, and dusted for prints, but Ryan had been careful, no hard proof tied him to it beyond the note. Could be anyone, the officer said, shrugging. I clenched my jaw, knowing it wasn't. I spent the day cleaning, salvaging what I could, shattered stems, a cracked frame of Emily's photo. Customers trickled in, their gasps echoing my shock, and Ms. Clara brought coffee, her hand on my shoulder. He's a monster, she whispered. I nodded, too raw to speak. By nightfall, the shop looked half alive, but I felt gutted. I drove home, dreading Ryan's smug face, and found him sprawled on the couch, a whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. Rough day, he slurred, grinning. I stared, my hands curling into fists. You trashed it, I said, low and cold. He laughed, prove it, babe. I turned away, bile rising. He thought he'd broken me, but he'd lit a fuse instead. Friday hit me with another blow. I logged into our joint account to pay the shop's insurance, $50,000, gone. The balance glared back, $12.34. My breath caught. I scrolled the transactions, yesterday, a withdrawal, all of it, to an account I didn't recognize. Ryan's name was on the transfer. He'd drained us, taken every penny we'd saved over 18 years, leaving me with nothing but a mortgage and a wrecked shop. I called the bank, frantic, but the teller's voice was flat. It's a joint account, ma'am. He's within his rights. I hung up, my vision blurring. He hadn't just stolen the deed or smeared my name, he'd stripped me bare, financially and emotionally. I stumbled to the kitchen, gripping the sink, and saw it, divorce papers on the counter, signed by him, with a post-it, sell the shop, or you're done. His handwriting mocked me, a final twist of the knife. I'd been a fool to think he'd stop at threats. He wanted me desperate, dependent, so he could swoop in and claim victory. I stood there, the papers trembling in my hands, and something snapped. Not despair, clarity. Ryan thought he'd cornered me, that I'd crumble and hand over Emily's legacy. He was wrong. I grabbed my phone and called a locksmith, changing every lock on the house by noon. Then I drove to the courthouse, the divorce papers clutched tight. I filed them, my signature bold beneath his, and requested a restraining order, citing the shop's destruction and the theft. The clerk's eyes softened as I explained, he's dangerous. She nodded, stamping the forms. I left with copies, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. Back at the shop, I taped a closed for repairs sign on the door and started rebuilding, ordering glass, restocking flowers, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. Ryan had taken so much, but he wouldn't take my fight. He showed up that night, banging on the house door, his voice slurring through the wood. Laura, let me in. Where's my stuff? I stood on the other side, silent, the new locks holding firm. You're locked out, I called, my tone ice. Divorce is filed. Leave. He cursed, pounding harder, but I didn't flinch. The restraining order was pending, and I'd already called the cops. Sirens wailed in the distance. He stumbled off before they arrived, but I knew he'd be back. I slept on the couch, a kitchen knife nearby, adrenaline keeping me awake. The next day, I checked the bank again, still empty, but a lawyer friend called. The shop's yours alone, Laura. He can't touch it legally. Fight for the money, though. I exhaled, relief mingling with exhaustion. I'd lost $50,000, but I had Emily's bloom, and that was enough to start over. Sunday, I reopened the shop, a skeleton of its former self but standing. Customers returned, their support a quiet strength. I bouquets ordered, words of encouragement. I sketched in the back, dreaming of a gallery again, when my phone buzzed. Ryan. You can't do this, he snarled. I'll sue. I laughed, a sound I barely recognized. Try it, I said, hanging up. He'd trashed my shop, stolen my savings, but he'd misjudged me. I wasn't his doormat anymore. The divorce was in motion, the shop was mine, and I'd rebuild brick by brick, petal by petal. I thought of Emily, her fierce spirit, and felt her with me. Ryan had pushed me to the edge, but I'd found my footing. This was my breaking point, not to fall, but to rise. Ryan didn't stop after the locks changed. He showed up at Emily's Bloom a week later, red-eyed and desperate, clutching a forged sale document he'd tried to push through. "We can split it, Laura," he begged, voice cracking. "Let's start over." I stood behind the counter, arranging daisies, and met his gaze. "You don't get it," I said, calm as stone. "It's over." The deed was mine, untouchable, and his forgery collapsed when I showed the police my legal papers. He slunk away, defeated, as customers whispered their support. Word spread, his lies unraveled, and folks saw the truth. I'd fought for Emily's dream, not stolen it. I swept the shop floor, a weight lifting. He'd taken my money, trashed my sanctuary, but he couldn't take this. I poured myself into rebuilding. Insurance covered the glass, and I restocked with vibrant blooms, roses, orchids, sunflowers, turning the shop into a living gallery. My sketches lined the walls, a corner for art taking shape. Friends rallied, bringing plants and laughter, and one day, Daniel, a quiet florist with kind eyes, offered to help with deliveries. We talked over coffee, his warmth thawing a part of me I'd forgotten. At 41, I wasn't looking for love, but his presence felt like sunlight after years of shadow. Ryan, meanwhile, spiraled. He lost his job, too many absences, too much whiskey, and lived off scraps in a rented room. I heard he'd tried begging my parents for cash, but Dad sent him packing. I didn't gloat, I just kept building. Living alone in the house felt strange at first, but peaceful. I'd sit on the porch, sipping tea, watching the world turn without Ryan's chaos. The divorce finalized, the restraining order held, and I reclaimed the $50,000 through court, his account frozen, his theft undone. I didn't need millions, just enough to thrive. Emily's Bloom flourished, and so did I. One night, pruning a rosebush, I realized something. I'd survived not just Ryan, but my own doubts. Loss had carved me hollow, but it also made room for growth. It's never too late to start over, not at 41, not ever. Life's a garden. You can let it choke with weeds or clear the soil and plant anew. I chose the latter, and that choice saved me. Hey everyone, Laura here. Thanks so much for watching my story unfold on this channel. It's been a wild ride, and I'm grateful for every view, like, and comment. If you've ever faced a tough chapter, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you catch my next video. Let's keep growing together. See you soon.